allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we start, everybody please make sure your cell phones are off or on vibrate, please. And I'm going to ask the board if it's okay if we take new public business out of order and put it as item number 6 so that we can accommodate our guest, Mr. Lynch, on Zoom. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes, please, from February 18th.
Approval of the minutes of February 18, 2025.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, none. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Lynch. We'll go right to your report if it's okay with you.
That would be great. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, albeit virtually, with you. I appreciate you taking me up first, and also allowing me to do this presentation to you via Zoom. I'm going to go right into the presentation, though, and I'm going to try to share my screen with you. I'm going to try to, at least. Actually, Rodney, can you, rather than try to figure this out, could you put on my presentation?
I can try. I don't have it saved.
I apologize for this. I usually...
Sharing it. I'm sharing it, it's not going. Yeah, he's gonna have to go without the PowerPoint. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, we're having technical difficulties. I don't know if you want to just proceed without the PowerPoint for now.
Oh, okay. Let me walk you through then what we're here to do tonight, and that's to announce the town manager finalists. Just by way of background to refresh everyone's memory of how this came about. We were engaged by the town back in. I apologize. Back in November of 2024 to help with the town manager search. We moved forward to identify the priorities of the town manager that the town had. And we did that through basically our own research, working with the department heads, and most importantly with members of the board as the chief elected officials of the town. And we conducted these stakeholder interviews in order to develop a position profile. That position profile we use as a means of recruiting candidates, but we think it's an excellent process for the town itself to go through as it starts to look at or think about what it needs or wants from the town manager moving forward. The position was advertised at the end of December, and we began conducting outreach to candidates with a deadline of January 29th. The way we got the candidates, just so people understand the extent to which we actually went out and found candidates for this position is we posted it on the Mass Municipal Association, the International City and County Management Association, both those websites. We also utilized all the graduate schools in the region that have public administration programs, all in order to try to develop as much word out on the street as we possibly could. We also took advantage of the fact that the Massachusetts Municipal Association annual conference was taking place towards the end of January, and that gave us an opportunity to meet a one-on-one with a number of candidates in Boston at that event. In addition to that, we utilize a database that we've generated over the years of potential candidates that have applied to us, the other candidates that have reached out to us who are interested in becoming managers, and communicated with all of the managers and assistant managers and some of the key department heads here in the Commonwealth. Again, focusing in on those that would be appropriate for the town of Danvers. And we conducted extensive candidate-specific outreach to those people in the region of Danvers that we thought would be a good fit for the town. Our deadline was January 29th, and we ended with 31 candidates that came forward, which is one of the more sizable pools that we've had for a community the size of Danvers. Interestingly, we've had some similar sized pools for some smaller communities, but in the case of Danvers, we felt that we were able to get a really very good, effective pool for the town. So with those 31 candidates, we then conducted a summary or a review of the pool with the screening committee. The screening committee, I might add, was an excellent committee to work with. To refresh everyone's memory on that, they were appointed by the board: Corrine Doherty, Stephen Gristoff, Eric Mitchell, Arthur Scamias, Walter Tibbert, Dan Bennett representing the board, and then Maureen Bernard also representing the board. And Maureen served as the chair. And the committee worked extensively in reviewing the applicant pool that we sent out to them, and then participated in a lengthy meeting where there was back and forth regarding the candidates, and selected 7 candidates that would be brought forward for interviews. In the course of 2 days, the committee did move forward to interview those 7 candidates. And the topics that we really focused in on were trying to get a handle from them of why they were interested in the town of Danvers and in the town manager position by looking at their career and how Danvers would fit into that overall arch of their career. We really worked with them to understand their leadership and management style and whether that would fit in with what had been identified as the type of style that the board and the department heads felt was necessary to be effective in the town of Danvers. We heard extensively in talking to the stakeholders, the board and the department heads, the importance of communication and collaboration and really building consensus around various issues in which there may be some division within the community. So we spent quite a bit of time on that, as well as citizen relations and government transparency. Because like every community, there's some sense that there's just not enough information out there for people to understand what's happening in their town. So we spent some time with that. Again, like many communities, land use, development, and community character have become the predominant issue that many people are focusing in on. And that certainly is the case in Danvers that we identified when we were talking to people throughout the town. That there's that sense of where is Danvers heading as a community, and so we wanted to understand their understanding of that issue and what they've experienced in trying to build consensus around those issues in the communities in which they've served. Personnel management and collective bargaining was also an issue in which we spent quite a bit of time. That whole notion of how do we in municipal government now attract and retain employees, as well as the importance of an effective collective bargaining strategy. Financial management, you can see, is obviously an important one for every community. Danvers is fortunate to have a good finance team. In other communities we work with, that is higher on the list. We wanted to focus more on some of these relationships issues and consensus building issues. But certainly we can't ignore the importance of, particularly in this year, in which many communities are struggling with their finances. You need someone that understands financial management and understands municipal finance. So we wanted to test them on that. And along with that, the importance of infrastructure investments. So looking at capital financing and project management. And then, at the end of the day, the most important relationship that every town manager has is with the select board itself. So we wanted to get a sense of how they communicate with the board, what's the relationship that they have with the board in terms of policy setting and execution. As a result of that whole interview process over those 2 days, the committee narrowed in after lengthy discussion and focused in on 3 candidates, and those are the 3 finalists that we're presenting to the board tonight. Go to the next slide. The first candidate is Jill Cahill. Jill is currently the Chief Administrative Officer in the City of Gloucester, right nearby. She has an MS in Public Administration from UMass Boston, a BS in Political Science from Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Prior to serving as the Chief Administrative Officer in Gloucester, she'd been the Community Development Director for the city. Prior to that, she held positions with a couple of nonprofits, for-profit, and had served as Chief of Staff to Senator Karen Spilka, the current Senate President here in Massachusetts. But you can see that she had a background in the nonprofit Pathways for Children as a communications and donor relations manager. Again, focusing in on, we thought it was relevant to her communications and her sort of consensus building and development issues that she was able to serve in that capacity. And then, of course, she had her own company or worked as with the event company, office and event manager for that. The second candidate is, I can just move up on the slide, is Sean Fitzgerald. Sean has most recently been the town administrator for the town of Swampscott, a position he held for nearly 7 years. He has some graduate work that he's done at Salem State College, but he has a bachelor in political science from Central Connecticut State University. His time in Swampscott, as I said, was about 7 years. He left there in December. Prior to that, he'd served for about 9 years in Plastow, New Hampshire. Obviously a smaller community than Danvers, but a good long run in both of those communities. And then also had served as the mayor's chief of staff for the city of Peabody from 2001 to 2008. Again, a good 7-year run. And he had some additional time working for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, as indicated on his resume. And serving as a regional services coordinator when MAPC was doing quite a bit of, began really working at more regional service delivery options. So Sean comes with a substantial amount of municipal administration, municipal experience in all of those communities. And then lastly, the third candidate is Patrice Garvin. Patrice is currently the Belmont town administrator, a position that she's held for about 7 years. She has a Master of Education from Boston College, a BS in Political Science and Sociology from Suffolk University. Again, a good long run in the town of Belmont. But prior to that, she served 5 years as the town administrator of Shirley, a smaller town, but she was able to move up from that into the town of Belmont and been successful in her position there. She also has other municipal experience working as the executive assistant to the town manager in Groton for a period of about 6 years, which she points to as being an important period in her time of learning the role of town administrator or town manager, learn a number of skills there as to executing on those administrative responsibilities. So those are your three candidates. What I've provided to Rodney for distribution to the board tonight is a packet of information. Within that packet is the cover letters of these three candidates as well as their resumes. Also provided what I refer to as an interview guide to help with some of the questions, and we can talk more tonight or before the interview on the 12th about how you want to go about utilizing some of those questions, and obviously you may have your own questions. But we've also included we've done query checks on all of these finalists. We've verified their employment, and we've spoken to their references. We have, when we was describing to, I believe, the committee when we met before, we spend close to as much time with each reference as we do with the applicants themselves. So in each case, we've spent 30 to 45 minutes or more talking to their references, trying to get an understanding of the skills of these candidates, their backgrounds, their style, the types of projects that they've worked on that could be informative to the board as you're making your decisions. And we've summarized all of those comments into a report that you have with the resume and the cover letters. We think that those will be helpful to you in understanding exactly what these candidates are all about. And so that's in the finalist report that I've provided to you, along with the questions and the some prohibited questions, if you will, just some recommendations of questions that you should not ask or we should not ask when we meet next week due to liability issues that we want the town to avoid. But hopefully all of that information will be helpful to you. And I stand ready to speak with each member of the board between now and the time you make your decision as to between now and the interview, certainly helping with any questions that you think are important that be focused in on and helping you work with those, developing those questions. And then, understanding the candidates more, behind, if you will, the reference report that you have, anything you want to talk about regarding the candidates and their interest in this position. And then ultimately, after the interviews, if you need any additional information from me, I'm prepared to work with you on that as individuals. The board interviews are scheduled for March 12th from 6:30 to 9:30. 1 hour for each of the candidates, 6:30, 7:30, and 8:30. That my understanding is that you're planning to hold that at the Danvers Senior Center. Rodney and I have talked about this, about the issue of having televised interviews. So my understanding is it has been arranged that there'd be a tape delay following the conclusion of the interviews. Then it will be broadcast for residents that are interested in watching that. But so as to avoid any concerns that one of the candidates might be watching and seeing the questions, there will be a tape delay. And then the selection of the town manager that night, which is possible, or after discussion, if need be, putting it off till March 18th, if required. And then following that selection, the commencement of contract negotiations. And for that, the board will need to determine who will be doing those negotiations. But I will be available for technical assistance to help mediate through any disagreements or any hurdles that may arise during those contract negotiations. So you can take down my presentation at this point, Rodney. I'd be happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Bernie. Dee, any questions for Mr. Lynch?
Not at the moment.
Okay. David?
Thank you, not Dan, at this moment, no.
Thank you. Mike?
Not tonight, thank you.
Maureen?
I first of all wanted to thank Bernie Lynch for everything he's done and all the applicants that did apply. As he said, we did have 31, down to 11, down to 7, down to 3. The subcommittee was great. We did really interview them and ask them a lot of questions, what it is why would you want to come to Danvers, about the land use, as Bernie said, the community development, the budget, collective bargaining. And we want, to us also, it was how well will you work with the residents and the employees of our town. So I just wanted to thank everybody, and I hope that we picked the right one. And I believe that, Bernie, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if any residents might have questions, they could possibly email the questions to Dan and copy us. So feel free, if anybody does have questions, to please email us, and we'll propose those questions as we see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Well done. Bernie, thank you, and I guess we'll see you on the 12th.
I will be there on the 12th.
And
Looking
you're
forward to it.
available to any members of the board if they have questions.
Yeah, everyone should have my email address, and I know that Rodney has my phone number, and I'm happy to take questions or calls anytime over the weekend, whatever works to help the board to get to the right decision.
Okay, thank you. So for the public to repeat, we're going to meet Wednesday, the 12th, at the Senior Center at 6:30. Thank you, Bernie.
Great, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I just want to, just a point of clarification, that is a public meeting. The public's welcome to attend in person. We just won't be broadcasting it live until after the meeting as the reasons Bernie mentioned.
Good, thank you. Okay, the board will hear from the town's independent auditor for the fiscal year 2024.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Scott McIntyre. I am a partner with Markham, although the audit report is signed off by Markham. But if perhaps Rodney's indicated to you, on November 1st of last year, Markham was acquired by CBiz, used to be known as Century Business. So we are now part of CBiz, which is one of the largest CPA firms in the world. There's kind of a lot going on in the business of public accounting right now. Just a couple of years ago, we were here as Melanson. Last year, we were here as Markham. I guess technically we're here as Markham because your audit report is signed off as Markham. But subsequent to the issuance of this, we have become part of CBiz. So.
Well, welcome again, Scott, after so many years of coming before us.
Thank you. I can't remember how many years ago I was last here. Others in the firm have had the privilege of coming to address the board. It's always a good meeting, I think. I'm not going to walk through a tremendous amount of detail. I'm going to give you the highlights, tell you about the audit process, and then I'll try to answer any questions that the board may have. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the governance letter. It's the about 6 or 7 pages. I'll get into your ACFR, or your annual comprehensive financial report, in just a moment. But the governance letter, and let me first explain why I call it a governance letter. Our professional standards require that we report to those charged with governance the results of the audit. So maybe it's a little bit of a slang term, but we call it the governance letter because our professional standards require we report to those charged with governance. Tells you a lot in here. I mean, historically, I've kind of walked through the highlights of the audit. Now it's been essentially codified in the governance letter. It tells you the auditing standards that we followed. We followed both generally accepted auditing standards in the United States and also generally accepted government auditing standards. A lot of similarities, but there are a few differences in those. On top of page 2, it tells you, actually at the bottom of page 1, it tells you what we audited. At the top of page 2, it talks about your required supplementary information and your supplementary information. With you preparing an ACFR, there's a lot more in here that might be present in a governance letter for someone that doesn't prepare an ACFR. At the top of page 3, we have identified a significant risk for a material misstatement. It should not be thought of as alarming. We've judged that management override of your internal controls is a significant risk for a material misstatement, and I can tell you with certainty that we identify that in every single audit that we do. Essentially, the auditing standards require that we identify management override of controls as a significant risk. And again, I'm required in this governance letter to express that to you. So, After that, some significant audit matters. What we're really talking about there are significant estimates in your financial statements. They're highlighted by those 4 bullet items. They're not the only estimates, but they're, in our professional judgment, they're the significant estimates. They deal with depreciation, they deal with your IBNR, or incurred but not reported liability, as well as your net pension liability and your net OPEB liability, and the related accounts that go along with them. At the top of the next page, it talks about difficulties encountered in performing the audit. You'll note that that's a very short sentence there. It basically says we encountered no significant difficulties in dealing with management in completing our audit. After that is a paragraph on independence. This is something a little bit new in here this year, and that deals with what I'll refer to as non-audit services. We're hired primarily to audit your books and records. Related to that, we do it in Danvers, and we do it in virtually 200 audits, throughout New England, probably more. We assist in the preparation of your annual comprehensive financial statement. That's a service that we provide that's not an audit service. And again, my professional standards require that I express to you that we do a service in addition to the audit that we consider to be a non-attest or non-audit services. So. That's really the highlights of the governance letter. It goes on for a little bit longer, but basically it's what I would call a clean governance letter. It doesn't tell you that we identified significant deficiencies in internal control. It doesn't say that we identified material weaknesses in internal control, and it doesn't tell you that we needed to make a whole bunch of adjusting journal entries in order for your financial statements to be materially fairly presented. So a very straightforward governance letter and the type of report that a community, in my opinion, would like to receive. Moving on to the ACFR, or the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the financial statements, if you will. I'm going to begin on print page 12. If someone has a PDF, it's PDF page 22, but the print page is page number 12. This is our independent auditor's report. This is predominantly what you pay us to do. It goes on for several pages. I'll summarize it. It's thought of as a clean opinion, or technically it's called an unmodified opinion, but most people refer to it as a clean audit opinion. It goes on for several pages because it tells you, again, the professional standards that we followed, tells you about the work that we did, and it gives you the basis for our opinions, but it is essentially thought of as a clean or unmodified opinion. In other words, your financial statements are materially fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles here in the United States. So now I'm going to skip all the way over to page 29, print page 29. I'll take a second and remind the board and anyone else who may be following along that there are essentially 2 sets of financial statements in the reporting model for state and local governments here in the United States. What I'm looking at here on page 28 and 29 is what I would refer to as the long-term perspective balance sheet. Technically, it's called your statement of net position. I'm just going to talk about this a little bit because in our professional opinion, no conversation about a local government's financial statements in 2025 is complete unless there's at least a brief discussion about your net pension liability and your net OPEB liability. So if you look on page 29, in that first column of numbers, it's just a little bit easier to focus on the governmental activities. About halfway down that first column of numbers on page 29, you see a net pension liability with a $94.9 million balance as of 6/30/2024. That liability is down from about $99 million in the prior year. And the reason for that is predominantly the more favorable investment earnings for calendar 23. That liability is actually measured as of the year end of your retirement system, which is 12/31/23. And investment earnings in that calendar year were significantly greater than they were in calendar year 22, as they were in virtually every system here in the Commonwealth. So, right below that is your net OPEB liability. OPEB, or OPEB, stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. By other, they mean other than pension. What it really means is retiree health care, the benefit that is earned by the employees here in Danvers while they're providing service to the town and its citizens, and the benefit they'll receive of health insurance when they retire. At 6/30/24, the governmental activities had a net OPEB liability of just under $122 million. That's up a little bit over the prior year, mostly driven by experience changes, actuarially determined experience changes. So, back on, real quickly, I meant to, when I was speaking about the net pension liability, for those that might be interested, for the measurement period of calendar year '23, you used a 7% discount rate, where in the prior year you used 7.25%. So you've brought that down. Most governments here in Massachusetts have been bringing that down. The discount rate is essentially what you expect the future earnings of the plan investments will be, so you can discount your liability by those future earnings. So Danvers actually brought that down, which is really quite consistent with many other communities throughout the Commonwealth. So, now, if I could turn your attention all the way over to page 32. Page 32, if the last couple of pages we were talking about were the long-term perspective, page 32 is the short-term perspective. It's not two sets of books, one set of books, just looking at it on a modified accrual basis and an accrual basis. Page 32 is probably the first place that 99% of the readers of your financial statements will turn, and they'll first look at that general fund column. Before I do, we're going to really focus on the general fund. To the right of the general fund column is your capital project fund. It was determined to be a major fund as prescribed by the accounting standards. And then you have your non-major governmental funds. And one account that I do want to point out in that column titled non-major governmental funds is about halfway down. You have an unearned revenue of $1,153,000. As of 6/30/24, that was the unspent ARPA money. It's called a unearned revenue because you received it, but you can't technically, under accounting standards, recognize it as revenue until you do with it what you said you were going to do, which is spend it on eligible items. So, now back to the general fund. That column, as I mentioned, is really the first place that most will turn. And one of the first places they'll look in that column is the second number up from the bottom, the total fund balance. As of June 30 of 2024, had a balance of $40.8 million, almost $40.9 million. That's up about $8.4 million over the prior year. And we'll see some of the reasons for that in just a minute. In that $40.8 million is broken into three categories: your unassigned, assigned, and committed. Most people are going to focus on the unassigned, but the assigned and committed, I think, are equally as important. The unassigned balance as of June 30, 24, with an account balance of $21.9 million, that's up about $1.5 million over the prior year. June 30, 23 was $20.4 million. It's jumped up to $21.9 million. It's also important to look at that $21.9 million and look at it as a percentage of your expenditures. What do you have in unreserved or unrestricted, unassigned fund balance? Get my terminology a little mixed up there, pardon me. The unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your general fund expenditures represents a little bit more than 18%, which is thought of as, it's an appropriate percentage for a community rated the way Danvers is rated. So, last bit on this, on the $21.9 million, it's highlighted in your footnotes, but I think it's important to remind readers that really is broken into two pieces. In Rodney and Heather's ledgers, they have a general fund and they have stabilization accounts. It's prescribed that way by the Division of Local Services for the Commonwealth of Mass. But GAAP, or Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, takes those two funds that are in the town's ledgers and puts them into one. Okay? And so the 21.9 is really broken into the general fund piece of about 16.8, which is the starting point for certifying your free cash, and your general stabilization account of $5.1 million. So I just wanted to point that out. It is highlighted in your footnotes, but that 21.9 is really broken into two pieces. So I want to hop all the way over to, I'm going to skip over the general fund statement of revenues and expenditures, and I'm going to go all the way over to page 38. Page 38 deals with your enterprise funds. And I'm taking you to the statement of cash flows for your enterprise funds. I'm purposely skipping over the balance sheet or statement of net position and the statement of revenues and expenditures. I'm not saying those are unimportant, but in my professional opinion, I think from an enterprise fund standpoint, readers should focus on the statement of cash flows. I don't want to get too technical here, but if you look at this page right here, and from the top down, if you look at the first subtotal of numbers, the net cash provided by operations. If I focus on the water fund for a minute, the first column, the first subtotal, net cash provided by operations, is about 3.5, almost $3.6 million. Financial institutions and credit rating agencies are going to look at that number, and they're going to make sure that it covers your P&I, your principal and interest on the debt service. And you see those two numbers further down that first column of numbers for cash flows from capital and related financing activities. Okay? In the water fund, if you look at the net cash provided by operations, it more than covered the principal and interest on the debt in those funds, generating a surplus, if you will, of about $1.2 million that can be used for capital infrastructure and things like that. And you see that process, if you look at all three enterprise funds there, you see that the net cash provided by operations covers and it actually exceeds the principal and interest on the bonds payable in those funds. And that really is the key metrics that financial institutions and credit rating agencies look for on an enterprise fund. Lastly, I want to turn all the way over to page 96. This gets into your budget versus actual results, which are a little bit different than the general fund. On page 96, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, just getting to the bottom line, if you will, in that fourth column, the variance column, it tells you that revenues came in greater than anticipated in the budget by $9.6 million. If you look up and down that column, you can see that the majority of that is from motor vehicle excise taxes, investment income, and in what is known as other or non-recurring, which is really just the landfill fees in fiscal year 2024. That's the revenue side of the equation. If you turn over to page 98 and look in that lower right-hand corner of page 98, you see on the expenditure side about 2.9. I'll round up and call it $3 million in unspent appropriations, and then unspent and unencumbered appropriations. So, if one takes the sum of those last two numbers, the revenues that came in greater than budget of about 9.6, plus the expenditures that came in less than budget of 2.9, you get about $12.5 million. So now I want to go one more page, and then I'll stop and answer any questions. I want to go all the way back to page 22. And towards the bottom of page 22, you see a little chart that has those same fund balance categories and what they looked like as of 6/30/24 and 6/30/23. And you can see that unassigned fund balance went up about $1.5 million, but committed fund balance went up almost $6.2 million. Essentially, all that budgetary surplus that we saw on the budget versus actual page, 96 and 98, when it came time for town meeting towards the end of fiscal year 24, a lot of that surplus was that had generated free cash was put towards capital spending. So that's why the surplus, if you will, that you see on the budget versus actual pages doesn't directly translate to a dollar-for-dollar increase in the unassigned fund balance. A lot of it is going to that committed fund balance. And the last thing, I'm not going to read it, but I would want to draw your attention to the paragraph right above the chart there towards the bottom of page 22. The town has tried to put into words a sort of a reconciliation, if you will. Budgetary performance was positive by $12.5 million, and here's what we did with that surplus. And as a result, our unassigned fund balance went up by roughly $1.5 million. That paragraph right above that is a good resource to go back to at a later point in time to understand the positive budgetary results. And I want to say only, I don't mean it only, but generating only a $1.5 million increase in the unassigned fund balance. That paragraph tells the reader, it connects the dots, if you will, between budgetary performance and changes in your unassigned fund balance. So That is a super, super quick walkthrough of our audit and your financial statements. There's really a wealth of additional information in the financial statements, or the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. A wealth of footnotes. I talked briefly about pension and OPEB. There's probably 20 pages of footnotes on pension and OPEB, everything you could ever want to know about them. Your report also includes what we call combining schedules. I focused a little bit on that non-major governmental fund column. There's some pages in the back of your ACFR that detail all the individual funds that the town has that go into making non-major governmental funds. And then there's also statistical pages in there. Statistical pages or stat tables are generally 10 years' worth of trend information. Those are the things that are in your report that another community that only prepares what is thought of as a basic financial statement, it would not include things like your combining schedule and your statistical tables. Danvers has done it for many, many years, gone above and beyond the basic reporting requirements and done this annual comprehensive financial report. So there's really a wealth of information in there. So I'll pause there, turn it back to the chair, and try to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Scott. Ronnie, do you want to introduce staff that's here that's responsible for this?
Let me see where they are. I have Heather Russo, our town accountant, is present, and also who helped work on this audit, who I don't see right now, but Jill Summit, our town treasurer, Nick Navin, our assistant treasurer collector / assistant finance director as well, helped throughout this process, and help in general, doing the hard work that gets the good results that we have here today.
Well, thank you to all for that work. We'll start with David. Questions?
I think you know it was very thorough presentation. I don't understand it all, but my father was an accountant, so I get the gist. Thank you.
Mike?
I'm glad you said that, Dave. There's a lot of this was Latin to me, too, although it does look like we're headed in the right direction. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, staff, for doing it. Just from what I see, the management override is at risk, but you said that's common. So we want to make sure that we tighten that up a little bit. To me, it looks like our investments are doing well because we've had the high interest rate environment. Now I think Rodney will, hedge those funds a little bit more carefully now that we think maybe rates will be coming down. I think it's helpful that the viewers see that we're slated to have the pension fully funded by 2035,
That's
right,
correct, yep.
Rodney? Okay, which that will help. The ARPA money, can you touch base about the ARPA money? You mentioned about that, that amount.
The ARPA grant came to states and local governments differently than virtually, not all, but virtually all other grants. Normally, grants, state and federal grants are what we refer to as expenditure-driven, meaning you have to spend the money first and then you seek reimbursement. So you spend the money, you seek reimbursement, and you can recognize that revenue, kind of the matching principle, if you will. Spend the money, match it with the revenues. With ARPA, it was a little bit different, where Danvers and other governments got the money essentially up front. You had the cash. I mentioned it because there's that liability called unearned revenue, and I often get questions about it. What does that mean? It means that it was like $1 million, a little bit more than $1 million. So as of 6/30/24, you had about $1 million in ARPA money that had yet to be spent, and because you haven't you haven't done with it what you said you were going to do with it, which is spend it on eligible items, you can't recognize it as revenue. So you will match, when you spend it, you'll match the revenue. So that liability, once you spend it, becomes revenue. That's all I was trying to highlight.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would also add that as of December 30th, we still have some accounting work to do to finalize, but all that money has now been spent as of,
Has been, okay,
yeah,
that
that's
was going to be
correct.
my next question. Thank you. It's nice to see, it was a lot. It's good that we've had this 2 weeks in advance to go through. But it's nice to see that, what was it, 29.7 million in new growth in residential, which was good. And then 25.8 in commercial growth. I like that. And And then, I think, like we said, one of the key thing is planning for the long-term budget drivers, such as the healthcare and the personnel costs. That's usually a big budget item. And then I know there was one other note that I wanted to mention. I should have put the little tabs there. On page, where is it? On page 32, when you were talking about that unassigned, that 21.9 number, can you explain that again, too? Is that because of the general fund piece?
What was that last part?
The general fund piece, is that, what is that?
Yeah, I was, the 21.9 essentially represents a fund balance that has no constraints on it whatsoever. If it's committed, it means that town meeting has said, we're going to take some of that surplus and we're going to spend it on capital. So there's a purpose associated, so the constraints are identified.
Do they have to say what they're going to spend it on?
I believe
Right,
town
yeah,
meeting said
right.
capital is
Capital,
considered
okay.
a purpose constraint.
Okay,
I'm getting
purpose, yeah.
pretty technical here, I usually
okay.
don't, but it's a purpose constraint. It's committed for a particular purpose, and that is capital. There's some other things too, but capital's the big one in Danvers. The assigned fund balance, that really represents monies from fiscal year '24 that have been encumbered and essentially brought into fiscal year '25, okay? The unassigned is fund balance or equity that has no constraints on it whatsoever. And I was pointing out that 21.9, I just like to remind people that it needs to be thought of in two pieces. There's two different funds in Heather's general ledger. She's got a general fund and she's got a stabilization fund. She does that like every other community in the Commonwealth. However, there's differences between how the State Department of Revenue wants you to keep your books and GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. So very simply, those two separate funds that Heather has in her ledger get consolidated into one for purposes of GAAP. And the 21.9 is broken down. Again, the general fund piece is about 16.8. The general stabilization is about 5.1.
And then that figure next to that 2,645,000, that went up from, what, 99,202 from last year?
Yep.
Approximately? And the reason for that?
Reason for that, if I may just clarify the question, I think what you're asking is, that's got parentheses around it.
Yes.
To indicate that it's in a deficit.
Right.
If you
Why?
look further up in that column of numbers, that the column is the capital project fund, you see a note payable of $4.5 million. Danvers, like so many governments in the Commonwealth, you oftentimes will issue short-term debt, a bond anticipation note, if you will. It's considered a short-term debt, so it's a liability. When you convert that short-term bond anticipation note to a long-term bond, 10, 20 years, I don't know what, off the top of my head, I don't know what you did from a time constraint, but that $4.5 million, I'm going to say it becomes revenue. Not technically a revenue, but so it'll wipe away that deficit. That deficit exists because you're not permitted by the accounting standards to recognize that $4.5 million, not to match the expenditures, but you're not permitted to recognize it as revenue, if you will, until you permanently finance it. It's a timing issue.
Time issue and accounting.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, again, more, so this is solely tied to the landfill project.
Right.
So that 4.5 was the money that we appropriated last year at town meeting to pay off that note, so.
Okay, good, thank you, Rodney.
Yep.
Okay. And, I mean, when you said, which was good, revenue was up 9.6 million due to the motor vehicle, excise taxes and things like that, and the investments and the landfill fees.
Yep.
I think, what was it I had just, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Dee?
Thank you for the report. I'm not going to go through the numbers, 97 pages of numbers.
Oh, come on, it's fine.
It appears to me that the only findings that was kind of like cautionary was the management override of controls. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean? As that's something that was the significant risk that you found. What is that?
When they use the word controls in that phrase, management override of controls, the controls really means internal controls, which are the policies and procedures, the risk assessments, the evaluation of things, the evaluation of what could go wrong internally here. Not that's done by us, but that's done by management. Those are the set of the internal controls that provide the framework for financial reporting and safeguarding of assets and things like that. It's deemed a significant risk because, as I mentioned earlier, auditing standards essentially require that we call it a significant risk. And as a result, we have to design audit procedures to make sure management didn't override. I think that's probably an important part. But now back to what we really mean by that is, if there's a control that's designed to prevent something, management could sometimes bypass that control, and therefore making it ineffective. So it may be a well-designed internal control, but not effectively operating. So we need to, because we need to design test work to make sure that management didn't override the internal control structure, the standards require that we not only look at how well it's designed, is it properly designed, we have to test whether or not it's effectively working. Does that help?
It does. So in our case, is it properly designed?
Yes. It's for the period under audit, and I just need to, that's something I have to say.
Okay.
For the period under audit, we found that the system was both well-designed and effectively operating.
If that's the case, why do we call that as a significant risk?
Because professional standards require us to report to you when we find a risk that requires us to go above and beyond what might be more, this is not a technical term, but standard audit procedures. Okay. We got to go above and beyond basic procedures and do something additional to make sure that that identified risk is mitigated to a point where we can still give an opinion that your financial statements are materially fairly presented.
Okay, perfect. Now, so between now and next year, is there a possibility that we don't have this as a significant risk? And what are some of the steps that we would take to get there?
I just want to clarify. So this isn't unique to Danvers. I think, and probably almost all your audit, I won't speak for you, Scott, but almost all that is the significant risk identified. That's not a thing where it's an improvement we need to make. It's just if something was going to go wrong, in the opinion, I won't put words in your mouth, but now I'm going to, in the opinion of Scott, that's where it would go wrong. So in other words, we have procurement laws in Massachusetts. Where could things go wrong quickly? If I said to our procurement officer, well, I don't care about that, just award this contract over here. Yeah. That would not be good for me professionally or personally, but like that would be, so that's what they, and every year when they're reviewing to make sure that we're following those procurement laws, purchasing laws, et cetera, that's the stuff they're checking. But that's what would be, if something was going to go wrong, that's what they've identified as most likely to go wrong.
Okay.
Is that?
I get it now. Thank you.
So you were asking, what would you have to do?
Yes.
Would it go away? The answer is no.
Okay.
The answer is no. It's not going to go away.
I get it. You used the word, in your opinion, several times, maybe 17 times during your presentation. Different kind of, in your opinion, professional opinion. Are these audit, and this is just curiosity and general understanding, are they based on numbers or interviews or a combination of both?
Now, did you say, I just want to make sure I understand the question. In the first page that I started was with the independent auditor's report. Are you referring to that?
Yeah.
Or just, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what, as a CPA firm, that's what you're hiring us for. The skills, knowledge that we have to be able to design tests, test your internal control system, test your account reconciliations. You're asking us to opine as to whether or not the financial statements are materially fairly presented. We base that, and you hire us to do that because of the professional auditing standards that we follow. I think it's in paragraph 3 on the first page there, under basis of opinion. It's the two sets of auditing standards that we are required to follow. I'm going to ask one more time. I want to make sure I
Yeah,
answered
so
your
that
question.
professional opinion is still based on our actual numbers. That's what, you look at the numbers and you say, based on my expertise, this is what I'm seeing. It's not just that how you feel, it's based on these numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And do you also do interviews? Does that play a role in
Yep.
your assessment?
Tonight I've talked a little bit, or actually a fair amount, about the internal controls and the management override. When we look at the internal controls and we test those, we do a lot of interviews of people. We do a lot of transactional testing. We don't look at every single transaction that goes through the books and records, but we do representative sample testing of expenditures and revenues as well. So it's our opinion based on following the professional standards.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Dean. Thank you. Scott, a couple of questions still I have. If I could ask you on page 30. Just explain operating grants and contributions of $30 million.
Sure. I'll first start, and I'll answer that question, but, this is a very different-looking income statement. Normally, and that's not a governmental accounting term, but usually you start with revenues and subtract expenditures. The purpose of this statement is to start with expenditures and subtract related revenues. And those related revenues are really, there's three types. There's charges for services, operating grants and contributions, and capital grants and contributions. And the question, Mr. Chairman, was on the operating grants and contributions, the $30 million. If I may, I want to focus on that column of numbers, the third number down from the top, the education row in operating grants and contributions of $20.6 million. I can get more specific if I focus on a functional revenue category than just operating grants and contributions as a whole. The largest piece of that $27.6 million in operating grants and contributions for the educational functional expenditures is things like Chapter 70, aid from the Commonwealth that's designed for the school department. And that's the biggest piece that's in there. I will also tell you there's a piece in there that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts contributes on behalf of Danvers and the teachers here in Danvers to the Massachusetts Teachers Retirement System. That's not cash that flows in and out of Danvers, but it's a transaction that is recorded in your books and records. So in addition to Chapter 70 being a large piece of that $27.6 million, the revenue you get, you don't get the cash, but you recognize revenue for the contribution that's made by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to the teachers' retirement system on your behalf. Those are the two largest components of there. Hope that helps.
That does, thank you. Page 67, there's a lot of questions going around about the opioid settlement funds that we've received and haven't expended yet, but the number here for the opiate settlement is $374,000. So that money will sit in this fund balance until we expend it?
Yes, I had to find the number that you were looking at there. Yep.
Okay, so I can't ask you how to spend it, but we'll find out later. Page 68. I don't know if this is a question from you, but the town's restricted net position comprised of numerous items, but there were additional items last year. I'm curious the change. Should I mention the ones from last year?
Sure.
Water mitigation, water use mitigation, $1 million. Child care, $700,000. Student athletic fees, $600,000. 9/11 department support, $600,000.
everything, my short answer, without doing some analysis, is we've tried to pick some of the largest components here. We do segregate permanent funds out because they're a different type of fund, but the majority of these things are your special revenue funds. So we've tried to select some of the largest ones. Everything else sort of falls into that other category, if you will. So I think there's still restricted net position associated with the accounts that you outlined. I was trying to take them down. I didn't get them all down, but I can compare with the prior year financial statements. But it probably is all captured in that other at the bottom there.
Through you, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
as part of the budget process, we can also, those are all segregated funds. So we can provide an update on the ones, year over year, the change on that as part of the budget, if that helps.
That's good, because
Yeah.
I don't think student athletic funds disappeared.
No, it did not. Neither did WUMP or,
Okay, so we can go over that during the budget season.
Sure.
Aaron, thank you. Page 96, you answered that question, thank you, about RSIs not being audited and what they are. Those are my questions, Scott, thank you very much. And if anybody in the audience have a specific question for the audit? Kevin?
Hi, Kevin Barrich, 34 Poplar Street. Dan, to your question, you asked about those year-end fund balances. I think one of those was recreation revolving. So last year, I think I brought up how I think Rodney said, oh no, we're zeroing that out. That goes back to free cash. And then town meeting appropriated that $1 million or so for playgrounds, right?
we closed a portion of the fund out that was then appropriated for playground, not the entire fund, no.
Not the entire fund?
No.
So $1 million or so was still left?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Mark, you all set?
No, I'm not all set, thank you. My major question is, listening to this report, and I look at it every year, and Mr. Conley is going to be requested to supply this report, just like every year. My question is come up to the free cash. Last year was 12.5. This year is 13.7. And before that, it was down in the $3 and $4 million amounts. And like I have always been concerned is that our budgets are inflated to receive the maximum real estate taxes that are available according to 2.5. My question is probably not for the auditor, but it's more for the Board of Selectmen. We seem to be having a large free cash. That's a misnomer, like we all know. But that number becomes larger and larger every year.
Mark, may I interrupt you?
You may.
Thank you. It's been pointed out a number of times in the last year and a half that the free cash number is high because of the landfill funds. And when that landfill comes online, that will be brought down. And on the Ides of March, we're going to hear the budget, and you'll see that the expenditure expectations is closer into line what it is this year. We won't have that big number on free cash. But we
Well-
still need to have some free cash in order to support the capital.
Well, my major concern has always been, and you know that, is that we have a lot of this cash floating around, and we use it for certain pet projects that happen. They may be, in my opinion, pet projects. In your opinion, may be different.
No, it's town meeting's opinion if they vote to pass the warrant articles or not.
I know, but it starts right here at the Board of Selectmen. So all I wanted to do is raise the issue that our free cash or our unspent money is growing every year, which is good, But the thing is I'm concerned about is that we're punishing our real estate taxes because our taxpayers are paying to the maximum that's allowed by law. And then we have this money floating around. So this
Well,
is
it's a
government,
good
this
point.
is not private
No,
industry.
we'll address it on the 15th. But I remember when they voted a policy at this board to have some free cash, because they didn't have any.
Well, that's a business decision
Right.
that was made. Yes, absolutely. But it was 1%. It wasn't
I don't think, I don't remember the number, I'm not gonna,
$1 million.
yeah, I'm not- my memory isn't that good. I thought it was $1 million, not 1%, but that's okay.
The final question that I have is, this is an audit of our financials inside our government. There's been some indications, like Dee mentioned, that there is a warning sign someplace. Was it as a result of finding something? Because I went through audits in a large company, and you can work your way around any audit findings. So what I'm asking is, are there any indications that we're doing something different than we should be?
It would have been in the management letter.
Well,
It's not there,
There's nothing in the management letter.
because there's nothing to find.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Anyone else? Scott, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out tonight.
Thank
and
you.
making the presentation.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
But you too. All right. We're going to go to the public hearing will be held in accordance with Chapter 82 to lay out the following private roads, anticipation of a vote for the acceptance as public ways at the May 25 annual town meeting, Hunt Street, Crane Street, Franklin Street, Chatham Lane, and Cololani Drive. Mr. Manager?
I will refer to our town engineer, Stephen King, who is here to present on.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone on the Select Board. My name is Stephen King, the Town Engineer for the Engineering Division, Department of Public Works. I'm here tonight as part of the process for laying out and accepting streets as previous private ways and becoming public ways within the town of Danvers. As the Chair previously mentioned, we have Chatham Lane, Colin-Tony Drive, Crane Street, Franklin Street, and Hunt Street. This step in the process, we hold a public hearing for the Select Board to lay out the street. The next step after the motion is approved would go to town meeting, for town meeting to appropriate and allow the Select Board to take the streets that we have listed here for tonight. Then once town meeting approves that, we'll come back to the Select Board in the summertime. We'll do the order of taking, which is the next process, where you actually take the by eminent domain, the right-of-way of the street as it's laid out by the surveyors. Then we record that document in the Registry of Deeds, and that becomes a public way in the town, which then turns back into our allotted mileage for our Chapter 90 funds that we get for the state for our roadway paving management program.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. I'll take any
Questions, Dee?
questions.
No questions. And hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying this, but I like your beer.
Maureen?
Hi, Stephen, great job.
Thank you.
Michael?
No, thank you very much.
David?
Dan, may I make a comment about the town engineer and the work of that department while the gas company has been ripping our roads to shreds? And I just want to acknowledge that I believe there's an enormous pressure on the engineering department to attempt to get the contractor to put the roads back in sensible condition. So I just think that's an enormous part of the work of that department that doesn't happen every year, but it's been really torture for everyone. That's all I want to say that. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Anyone in the public have questions? Bill Bradstreet?
Bill Bradstreet, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. The streets and ways that have to be accepted, how many of them are there left?
5 less than last year.
I'm looking for I'm sorry, I'm looking for a number. I know, I hear what you say. How many are left? Does the town have to pay for these acceptance by our money, or was it, or is it supposed to be paid for by the developer who created that street away?
Stephen, can you answer that?
You, Mr. Chair. The answer to the first question, we have a potential of 82 streets still remaining to potentially become public ways in the town of Danvers. And for streets or roadways that are currently private, these are roadways that we're already essentially providing services on. We've been plowing, we've been picking up trash, recycling. They're previous to the subdivision control law, so therefore the developers are no longer existent that we can go after them for the funds to do this work. So in the best interests of us getting the money for Chapter 90 funds and we're already providing the services on the street, those are the ones that we typically pick. On this list tonight, there are two that are previous or post the subdivision control law. That's Chatham Lane and Colantoni Drive. We have performance bonds for that work. They completed all the work. They've been in front of the planning board for acceptance, and we were basically closing that straight out. We've got all the documents from them, and the town has not paid any services or fees for those two streets.
Okay,
welcome.
thank you. Anyone else? Motion to close the public hearing, please.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, none, thank you. What's the will of the board?
Which one? Oh, I move that the select board lay out the following roadways as public ways in the town of Danvers and recommend to the town meeting that the following roadways be accepted as public ways in the town of Danvers: Hunt Street, Crane Street, Franklin Street, Chatham Lane, Colantoni Drive, said layouts being particularly described in the respective layout description to be executed by the select board.
Was there a second?
Second?
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, none. Thank you, Steve, for coming tonight, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to recognize Renee Hunter from my office. She's done a lot of the legwork for the past 20 years, starting with Rick and then myself, helping me out with these projects. So very appreciative of our help every year doing this.
Renee, thank you for coming to support Steve.
Thank you.
Who's
Thank
the
you.
other assistant that you have with you, Mr. King?
That's the younger Mr. King. Town government.
Good, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night. All right, we'll go back to new public business if anybody in the public has anything to offer. Mark?
You don't want to go first? Oh, okay.
I'll decide who goes first.
Well, that's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The reason I'm here tonight, sitting through this dissertation about our audit and everything else, is I always learn something from that. But what I'm here today is I have been here since December 17th, which at the meeting I requested, or you volunteered, to provide a some kind of a documentation, whether
Mark, if I may, staff is working on a document subject to input from this board, the thoughts that they presented, forwarded to the town manager. Staff is working on it. I can't give you a timeline
Well,
at this moment.
Well, I'm here because my patience is dwindling, and I believe that Danvers residents deserve a position from the Board of Selectmen because the activities at the airport are continuing, and we're still awaiting for a decision by MIPA in regard to the hangar location. And I think a letter or some kind of a supporting document that supports the Danvers residents, that they're finally fed up with what's going on at the airport on the Danvers side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No, that's it. Okay, Mr. Town Manager.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as we touched on a little bit earlier, and we've received a couple emails inquiring about our opioid settlement funds. So for those unfamiliar, back in 2021, the State Attorney General negotiated settlements with several distributors and pharmaceutical companies related to the opioid epidemic. Each community gets an allotted amount. For Danvers, over the next, it's a couple of years in, but through, I believe it's 2038, we'll receive a total of $1.5 million in funds restricted for opioid harm reduction, mitigation, et cetera. To date, we have received $374,000 out of the funds that were just talked about in FY24. We've received an additional payment in FY25 as well. We have not cut checks on a majority of that money. I set up a meeting to talk to the health director and the public health nurse, Frank Giacalone and Judith Ryan, who are handling that process. They have been coordinating planning. They've had discussions with Danvers Public Schools, our public safety divisions. They're also looking at some community engagement as part of that process as well. We've made some smaller purchases, but the key part is these funds do not go away. They're ours to use. There are restrictions on how we can use them, and that's part of their planning process as well as talking to the state on what's considered an eligible use and what they would consider ineligible. But I think probably sometime this spring, I think it might be good to have the health director come and present on sort of what the long-term plans are for those funds. And again, we're happy to take any input, but I just wanted to clarify that we don't need to spend them right away. It's not use it or lose it, and they are well underway in a planning process, not just for the existing funds, but how to use them over the next 10, 15 years.
So I'm very confused about the direction the state is sending us. We have to strengthen rather than supplement resources for prevention. Can you explain that a little bit?
I don't believe I can, but I would hazard a guess that, again, they want to make sure that we're not just taking costs that we're already utilizing and just charging it off. But again, I would have to dig in a little bit deeper on that to provide a more thorough answer.
I would appreciate
We
if you
can
do
also
that.
involve town council as well to determine,
Right.
make sure that we're,
And what I'm hearing is we'll put together some strategies on how to use these funds going forwards,
correct.
because I think it's important that we do have some type of interaction with individuals that have issues and help keep them healthy. Is that possible?
So I think there's restrictions on we couldn't give out individual grants to a select individual, but however, we can partner with other organizations that can essentially do that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board members on this?
On the opioid?
Yeah.
No, not
Okay.
on that particular.
Okay.
I do have one. Is it my understanding that, to you, is that okay, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, please.
Is it my understanding that future funds will not have to go to town meeting for approval? Is that
Correct. So what happened was, as is commonly the case, we get revenue before the DOR dictates how they'd like us to account for it and appropriate it. So in this case, we got the funds in. The first $178,000 came in and closed out to free cash. So that's why we had that first-time appropriation of that $178,000 directly into the now opioid fund. The DOR clarified that moving forward, it doesn't require appropriation, can be spent as the funds are received. So we have a segregated fund where that revenue will go in and come out of.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Rodney?
Couple items, the FY26 budget, as we've talked a little bit about tonight, March 15th, Saturday, we'll be here for our marathon budget session, which should be very thorough and fun, dare I say. The budget is currently online under the budget section of the town website. We also have a link to the school's budget as well, which is also available on their site as well as ours. And again, we look forward to seeing everyone on Saturday for that. And then lastly, we have a couple birthdays. We have two people whose birthday it is today. One is my son, William. He turned 6.
Oh, wonderful.
But more noteworthy, Anita Hughes, who's a Danvers resident currently at Brightview, turned 100 today.
Oh, wonderful.
So we issued her a centenarian certificate that was delivered by Matt Mitchell, our Director of Senior Services at Brightview this afternoon. So we wish her a happy birthday as well.
Good, thank you.
Thank
Good.
you.
Okay, all set?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we have a motion on the consent calendar, please?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to consider the consent calendar, items as they appear below.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Correspondence, new business, comments. David, would you start, please?
Yes, thank you. I received some criticism that I am not attentive at meetings and that I'm fumbling with my phone, et cetera. I apologize to members of the board and the audience if that appears to be inattention. Number one, I'm half deaf, and I have to go to my phone to control my, what do you call it? And the other thing, I'm doing 13 or 14 hours of various health care during the course of the week, because I'll be 83 next October. And I got to tell you, it is a monster of a job managing that, and so sometimes I get distracted. So if it looks like I have been inattentive to the business of the town, this has been 51 years of paying attention to the business of the town, and I don't mean to ignore anything. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike?
Dan, is it appropriate, I had come up with a bunch of questions for tonight, and my questions are for Rodney. I didn't want to take up the auditor's time. Is it okay to ask them?
Why don't you reach out to Rodney if it's about the audit, because we've already heard it, and he might be able to answer your questions.
Okay,
And if there's anything that he feels this board needs to know, he'll let us know.
okay, all right, thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that there was a bunch of us that attended Falcon Fest at the first annual Pancake Festival. It was great. Thank you for everybody that volunteered. They do a terrific job. Remember, they're doing this for our community. And they're always looking for volunteers. I think they look at their website once a month. So if they're looking for any donations or funds, that would be great. And I also wanted to extend my sympathy to the Calitri family, Anna Calitri. The Calitris have been in this town forever. My mom actually worked at Calitri's years ago, and I'm very sorry, Tony. We'll tell you too. So I just wanted to say that.
That's it? Thank you. Dee?
Looking forward to the interview and the budget discussions.
It will be a busy week next week. All set? Folks, when you see a veteran, please thank him or her for their service to our country and our community. And if there's nothing else to come before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Good night, Danvers.
All right.